ambitious, and ready to earn. WESN, the content capital, is expanding, and we're looking for dynamic media sales executives to join our team. Sell powerful advertising solutions across television, digital, and social media platforms, and help brands tell their story. If you have strong communication skills, a passion for sales, and the drive to succeed, join WESN today. Send your CV to marketing@wsncc.com or WhatsApp 6861662 and start building your future.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
In this day of stay-at-home and work from home, home has never meant more than it does today. Whether you're looking to buy, rent, or build your new home, now is the time to get going. Gittins & Gittins real estate agents are here to take you to that place of your dreams. Let us take you home. We help you find that rental to rest along the way, or journey with you to find your home destination. Investors and commercial enterprises too, call us and we'll walk the distance to place your business in just the right location. Owners, leave the headaches to us. We'll find your tenants or buyers while you stay at home. We'll even manage your property at your bidding. Anything real estate, come home to Gittins & Gittins Real Estate. Call us at 760-3280 or 747-1220 or visit us at 16 Fifth Street in Woodbrook.
WESN.
Good morning, Shawn Michaels Wall here. This is another new edition of Talking Point. Apologies for not having a live show yesterday. Something very interesting happened to me, or rather, it was what I observed after the fact that was interesting. It was so interesting that I immediately thought I have to talk about it. As much as it is not necessarily a pressing national issue, perhaps it is somewhat of a clue, a window into society, for better or worse. I had an issue where just before I was going to reach the office, in order to start the show, my car shut down at an intersection, right at the top of the intersection, right in front of the light. Couldn't get it to move. And of course, those new cars, it's not like you could count on experience as to how to get it into neutral when the gear shift is dependent on the car being on and all of that. It was a mess. I couldn't leave the car, so unfortunately I couldn't do a show. While waiting to sort it out, I observed an interesting phenomenon. So of course, car shut down, and I'm by myself for the most part. And then even when I got help, we couldn't move the car manually out of the way, push it out of the way. In fact, there was the opinion of one passing driver that modern cars, they just turn into bricks. There might have been a way to move it, but I'm not sure if it would have worked. But we didn't know. So we're stuck there, not knowing how we could move the car before a tow truck arrives. In the middle of the road. Hazard lights are on, and we're constantly having to tell people to drive around. Now, on one hand, I understand that it's not always readily apparent what hazard lights means, because sometimes people would be driving with hazard lights on because something went wrong with their car, something is up. But my car was sitting still. And for the life of me, I could not understand why people refused to identify the fact that the car is not moving with hazard lights on probably is a big clue that it can't move. So what would happen is cars would pull up and drive right up behind my car, leaving themselves no room to maneuver, and then incessantly honk the horn when it doesn't move off, not figuring out that the hazard lights are on. Now, there's a part of me that wondered, is it that they only saw one of the lights and thought it was a turn indicator? Well, hazard lights seemed very obvious to me. And one of the things that bothered me especially was the fact that quite a few of the drivers seemed quite distracted, willfully so, because they were, in some cases, a little more understandable, too busy talking to the person, the passenger next to them, and in some cases they were on their phone. And in some cases they were literally not paying attention to what was going on in front of them. They were on complete autopilot, and they were only paying attention to whatever turn they were looking to make. They were watching the intersection, which they didn't reach yet, more than they were actually looking, studying what was going on in front of them. Because it was bad enough when cars didn't understand what the hazard lights were on to indicate. But there were situations where 2, 3, 4 cars would drive around. And some people were smart. Some people figured it out. Oh, hazard lights, he's not moving, I'll drive around when the light is green. And then some people would watch people drive around and proceed to then fall directly in line behind my car and creep up. Because there's some phenomenon with drivers here, not all, about 1 in every 3 drivers. They see somebody doing something, instead of giving them room to do whatever it is they're doing, a 3-point turn or whatever. No, they have to come all the way up. You're parallel parking, I'll come all the way up. I'll crowd you in. Why? Why do you have to always go all the way up? The light is red, but I need to block the side streets. You can't turn into the side street. No, I need to block it because I have to go all the way up to the car in front of me. There was no, I was in front of the intersection. There was no risk of some car coming to bypass them, to cut them off. We went on the savannah. I don't understand. So you had drivers who would watch cars drive around, and they still wouldn't get the hint. And then they'll be honking their horn, beep, 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 getting vexed. No one's in the car. There's no strong tint on that car. And it reached the point where it was getting frustrated. One lady noticed us waving at her, trying to get her attention to tell her to drive around. And instead of paying attention to what we were saying, she waved back, thinking, oh, we're just there on the block to flirt. So, I mean, of course, at some point, we just left her to be stuck for a few more minutes. She had to wait for the light to turn back green again because it was green. But she don't actually want to pay attention to her surroundings and try to actually hear what we're saying to her. We're right next to a car, you know, just one car width away. But I guess she's so busy with the conversation with her passenger. It was hilarious. So she's waving back all shy. It's like, isn't that a flirt? There's a car stopped in front of you. There are people on the side road waving at you. Maybe put 2 and 2 together and think it's not about you, but it's about the fact that there's an obstacle in your way, and we're trying to tell you you need to drive around it and not wait for it to move. So that was a very interesting phenomenon to witness because it happened so often. We literally, because in theory, you know, you walk out, you tell people what's up, whatever, whatever, whatever. But we literally couldn't do that for every car. We literally couldn't do that for every car. The sun was way too hot, and I mean, just standing there trying to direct traffic, kudos to traffic wardens and police officers who do so. But it was not a short wait. And it happened so often. It really, you started to lose faith in humanity, to be honest. Because there was incredibly lack of awareness of some drivers of so many drivers. Now, it wasn't 1 out of every 2. It wasn't, half of the drivers did it. But it was enough that at times it seemed like 1 out of every 3 drivers just were completely oblivious to what was going on in front of them. Because, I mean, maybe later you could call in and let me know what you think. But if I saw a car with hazard lights on, because I remember a while back at the same intersection, but opposite to me, there was a maxi it was a similar situation. He was stuck right in front of the lights, right? He was the first car in front of the lights. His hazard lights were on. Well, once I saw that, and I saw the guy next to the maxi, it didn't take long to figure out what's up. It was causing a lot of traffic too because it was blocking, it was making things really difficult for anyone wanting to go, I can't remember the name of that street now, but wanted to go straight essentially because you had both opposite flows of traffic trying to use one single lane because he's blocking off the other. But it was what it was. Now, maybe there was, in some cases it's understandable because they approached a situation and they saw a car waiting by a red light with hazard lights on, they're not sure. Some people were unsure and they kind of held back. But they held back to the point where I was kind of confused, like what are they looking for, waiting for? What do they think is going on? And then there were the geniuses who got vexed at the car with the hazard lights on that couldn't move, honked their horn incessantly, and then when they finally listened to the people tell them to drive around, well, it took them so long because they were so concerned about being vexed at how dare a car with hazard lights on be unable to move. At least in one case, maybe 2, they decided to drive around and break the red light. It was incredible, the lack of awareness. At least I would like to think that it was a lack of awareness and not intentional, an intentional degree of entitlement. This car wastes my time. Well, I'm sorry I shut down where I shut down. I didn't choose to do it there. I literally pulled up. Then, as the light was going to turn green, got a warning message, and I couldn't go anywhere with it. It would not move. So, on some level, things like that happen. I just don't understand why there seems to be so many drivers who can't read the signs. But it does come back down to that situation of not a small minority of them. They were too busy on their phones or whatever while driving. It was incredible. As though no one ever broke down on the roads before. Yes, I know it's not a regular occurrence, but it can happen. And there was at least in one situation where, because people had a lack of awareness, they almost crashed into each other, trying to drive around my car at the same time. It was incredible. It was, I don't know what to say. So now it makes me wonder, the old allegation of having to buy a license, how many people actually did? How many people are just completely unaware of what's going on in front of them while they drive? Or how many people just do not have good judgment? Because it was ridiculous, the amount of people. And again, it's one thing for you to come up to a situation and the signs aren't fully clear. It's another thing to watch 3, 4, 5 cars drive around an unmoving vehicle with hazard lights on. And you're so unaware. You're so unaware that you just drive up behind the unmoving vehicle with hazard lights on that everybody in front of you, including the car immediately in front of you, drove around, and you're expecting it to move off and you're acting all surprised and upset when it doesn't. I think it might have been Winston Churchill or somebody of that ilk who basically had a statement about think about the average intelligence of a citizen of wherever, or the intelligence of an average person, and then realize that potentially approximately 50% of the population is dumber than that, whatever you think the average is. I mean, that's not accurate maths, but in this case, I wouldn't necessarily say it's about lack of intelligence. It's really about lack of awareness on the roads. Taking things for granted. I don't understand. I don't understand. It was funny, and it was also somewhat disappointing. Because if you're going to be potentially willfully unaware while operating a vehicle, to what extent are citizens of TNT going to be irresponsible in other areas of life? So I just had to get it off my chest, because it was basically the traffic light couldn't change without somebody doing that nonsense of just being completely oblivious. Now, some people, it took them a little while to figure out what's going on, like I said, because they had no clues, but I was fine. Some people figured it out real quick. But it was the ones that basically had all the signs in front of their face and refused to pay attention. That bothers me. We already have a situation where in our politics, too many people in the population refuse to pay attention. The difference is, instead of being stuck behind a car that can't move while the light is green and wasting the green light, so you have to wait for it to turn red and come back green again if you waste too much time, instead of just such a minor consequence, when you are willfully unaware of what's going on in the country, that's when bad things could happen. Thankfully, we were not completely willfully ignorant about certain things that happened, like, say, with the Auditor General. But I would argue in other things we are, at Auditor General in the last administration, by the way, or the Brent Thomas situation. But in other things we are willfully ignorant. Now, the previous administration, they had the pariah situation. The pariah situation did not reflect well on them. It didn't, at the end of the day. At least with regards to the crisis response. At least. But here's the thing. The public outcry pushed them, and they listened to do a commission of inquiry and to reveal the results. Political appointees, allegiances, and thrown by the wayside potentially, or at least not considered as much as usually you would think it is. Because in theory, if the population and the opposition pushed it further, you could have maybe brought yourselves to ask more questions about the overall oversight, management, strategic management in particular, of pariah. Because the crisis management was a complete disaster. And on some level, that falls not just on the management day to day on the scene, but the people that put them there. And the people that put those people in that position to put that management team there, according to the Commission of Inquiry. But the initial emotional outrage, because the situation as it happened was undeniable. And the government of the day wisely said, let's not try to push back on this. Let's not try to cover this up. But then when we got the Commission of Inquiry report, what happened? By that point in time, public interest, regardless of how you feel of it, you could feel all the emotions. But where was the interest to seek resolution, to force the politicians to move towards a resolution of the issue? Where was it? And this is just one example. This is just one example where the public at some point turned off. Even if you're following the news, even if you're saying, oh my gosh, look what they're doing to these poor people, that's unfortunate. How they could do that, they're wicked, eh? But what are we doing about it? Because we're just hearing the news when it comes to us. We're not actually trying to follow the situation. We're not actually looking to demand a resolution. So they don't. And maybe they quietly fix it behind the scenes. But look how long it's taken for essentially all of the things that should have been done within the first few months. A lot of it hasn't been done yet. And it's just being dragged out, whether it is court matters or restitution payments or, well, I doubt we'll ever hear anything about consequences for the people involved. You know, the people that prevented any rescue attempt with potentially not enough data. The people who did not necessarily have the right stuff to be making that call in the first place, but at the end of the day, all we have is a Commission of Inquiry. It's never been delved in deeper. I wonder why. This crime situation is across multiple administrations, you know. And whenever I speak about the public's lack of engagement over this topic, it includes the previous administration. And I said it during the previous administration, let's be clear. But when the public wants to be willfully unaware of things, that's when there's no consequence. That's when there's no resolution. That's when there's no lessons learned. That's when we set ourselves up to repeat our mistakes on top of the fact there's a magnifying glass on a bad situation. And somehow, at times, the bad behavior is allowed to continue in essentially full view of the public, because too much of the public is willfully unaware. And I understand, you know, a lot of people, life, important things going on, house, family, you know, children, school, all these things, your job, your pets, which pet's sick, which pet old, which pet bites up the couch. I get it. Life happens. You live in a country. No matter how good your life is put together, I ask you, what's going to happen if the country falls apart around you? The ones who can't go away, all right, fine, you have your own answer to that question. Is everybody going to say that they are completely confident that they could pack up their bags, sell off everything and go? Because I'll tell you this, a lot of the people who have the ability to leave this country at a moment's notice, it's not because they're going to sell their house at a moment's notice. They don't have to sell off things to have the capacity to go. So if your net worth is or near 100% stuck in here, I have some bad news for you. You need to figure out what's going on here and not take it for granted that you will know exactly when to start to sell off to move, unless you want to go abroad broke. Because this is what's going to bother me the most. Huh? You're going to complain about politicians here, but do nothing about it, say nothing about it, except in social gatherings, because it's fodder for jokes and laughs. But to actually say you're going to be involved, no, you're not going to do that. Then, if the you-know-what hits the fan, you're going to leave. You're going to go abroad as a migrant, searching for a better life. A non-national a non-citizen with less rights. And then some will actually have issue with not having the full rights of citizens and will do whatever it takes to get it because they want to be able to be represented by an elected official as well, and might end up being more engaged in the process over there than over here. That's one thing about our Caribbean migrants. I feel as though we integrate very well, as opposed to other areas of the world who don't want to integrate at all. They want to come to another country, leave their country because they have issues in their country, come to a new country and don't seemingly understand to not bring some of the same issues they're running from in the new country because they want things to work like it did in the country they left, in the country they fled from. No. Our Caribbean migrants are different. We know how to integrate. We bring our culture. But we don't necessarily bring our culture to try to override and overstep. But the flip side of that is, it's almost as though, yeah, we go abroad and we want to get into a more leveled up society because at home, things not working. But hey, you want to know why things aren't working? Because we are part of the problem at the end of the day. Facebook Marketplace. There is another warning in the news about Facebook Marketplace. At this point, and it's not necessarily about Facebook Marketplace, so all apologies to Facebook, it's about online fraud. And at this point, one would think, for all that is right and true and just, at some point, should not the public, if you don't read the newspapers, at the very least, word of mouth. I don't know if, in this case, the victim is young. I know young people, they always know better. I don't know if it's maybe because of that, right? Or if it's the non-age specific human feeling of, well, it's not going to happen to me. Magically, I'm the main character. It won't happen to me. It'll happen to you. It won't happen to me. I don't know if that's what came into play here. 11:45 in the morning. $7,000 in cash, $12,000 gold chain. Again, I don't understand. Somebody I know has purchased one thing off of Facebook Marketplace. I am fairly certain he wasn't going to go with no $12,000 gold chain. I went with him for the sake of him not going alone. He felt more secure with someone going with him. He didn't want to go alone. And this was a relatively nice area. And he was still thinking about security. So I don't understand. Is this a situation where people are willfully unaware? We are so concerned about being on our phones and on social media. And in fact, some of these warnings hit social media. Is it that we ignore it? Like we ignore, some drivers ignore hazard lights on a stopped car that didn't move the whole time? Eight HY movie projectors were also stolen at $1,800. An Apple iPhone 500 US. So that's around 3,500 TT. And another gold chain, only $300, and personal items. So that's about $24,000 of stuff stolen. So now here's the thing. The commissioner apparently is urging people, or the TTPS is urging people to use safe exchange zones. Now I'm not entirely sure. Okay, they say police stations, well-lit public spaces, locations equipped with CCTV cameras provide a safer environment. I would argue this. We have reached the point now where it seems as though The public is willfully ignorant of this. This is one of those situations where I would say the government should not step in. People should have freedom of choice. People should be adults. People should be able to use their own judgment and discernment. Because once the government is stepping in on situations like this, not only is it about rights and freedoms, but it's also just resource allocation. The government cannot literally hold your hand throughout your entire day, every day of your life. Just doesn't have the resources for that. Which is why at the end of the day, we don't have enough resources to give everybody a government-trained driver. They have to drive on their own. We could get public transportation, but that's different. That's one person for whoever wants to be in a bus or what have you. But we can't literally hold people's hands in all sorts of situations with government support services. We just don't have enough resources for that. So we depend on each other. Exercise good judgment in as many aspects of your personal life. I mean, technically that's your personal responsibility, yes. But now it's reached a point where perhaps the government should go further, because this is a repeated thing. Now, I don't have the full statistics, so maybe when you look at the on a macro scale, it's not that bad, or at least not bad enough to do something drastic like banning Facebook Marketplace, going to all of the internet service providers and figuring out a way to basically ban that, or contacting Facebook and telling them don't allow it for IPs originated in Trinidad and Tobago. Like, I don't know if it's bad enough to go to that point. One of the things I do think now is perhaps formal, official procedure for the utilization of police stations to sell things. Maybe that should be adopted. The problem is, it's not a silver bullet. It could lead to more problems, unanticipated issues. All of a sudden now, half of the police station is a market, essentially. So depending on the amount of people wanting to sell things and the nature of what's being sold, it's not as though police stations have unlimited space. But like, it reaches the point now where I would argue, at least when it comes to items of a certain monetary value threshold, perhaps there should be some sort of facility. Once you get into the thousands of dollars range, right? All right, conduct it at a police station. I don't know to what extent officers in the station are overworked, particularly day shift, but it is what it is. Because now officers are going to have to look into another robbery to the tune of thousands of dollars. Now, granted, if you're going to sell something that's a couple $100, something small, all right, fine, maybe, yeah, you're on your own. Please don't go to some back alley side street, dark corner of the country and get yourself robbed. But also, I don't know what to say. It's fine, you want to enjoy your jewelry. I understand that philosophy, that mindset. $12,000 gold chain. You want to enjoy that on most days, that's fine. I'm not saying you can't wear it. I'm just saying maybe don't wear it when you're going to meet some people who you've never met to sell something, when it is a known crime. And I don't know to what extent the police have the financial resources made available to them. The government did cut back on spending on media and advertising, and that's not just PR, look at me, look how great we are. That also means public service announcements, I would imagine, to some extent. Because you cannot demand TV stations and radio stations and newspapers to literally just force them to give up, ridiculous amounts of advertisement time and space just to send out PSAs for free. So at some point you have to pay if you really want to push it, if you really want to push certain messages. And maybe this is one of those messages that needs to be pushed, because at some point this is going to go badly and people are going to start to die. That's my fear. One of the key things in at least this article, both papers cover the story, but I'm just going to take it off of one. Police advise citizens to exercise caution when dealing with individuals who refuse to meet at safer locations, that is to say, well-lit public spaces, locations with CCTV cameras, and, if necessary, police stations. If the person refuses to go to places like that, is it worth it? Because whatever money the seller in this situation thought he was going to make, he lost exponentially more. Exponentially more. The article, I don't know if this is from the police service or the article, but the article has other tips. Review the profile of the buyer or seller for authenticity. That's a big thing. But some legitimate buyers, they might literally join Facebook Marketplace for the first time because they need to offload something. So it's not 100%. But it does matter. Consider it. Check for reviews or ratings that may indicate suspicious behavior. Again, it's not going to be 100% foolproof, but you still should do it because it could give you a clue. Be wary of unusually low prices as they may signal a scam. Yes, if it looks too good to be true, probably is. And I believe Ashraf, way back when he was not on pre-retirement leave as the official media ambassador, brought this up with Facebook Marketplace or online fraud years ago. So sometimes you have to understand that when there's a public service message, you might think, oh, I've seen this or heard this already. But a lot of the issues with regards to people falling for fraud or scams or being led into a trap to get robbed, it's because those people potentially didn't hear the messages or they disregarded it. And not all of the repetition is meant for you, although the repetition at times could cement the information in your head. Arrange meeting during daylight hours in public places with high foot traffic. Avoid isolated areas. One would hope that would be the norm. Always inspect items before making payment. Some people might want to come across as though you being cautious is insulting to them. Listen, if anything goes wrong, are they going to reimburse you? Are you confident in that? If it's a business transaction, take emotion out of it. You feel disrespected, that's nice. I'm here to do business, not mind your feelings. Consider bringing a friend or relative along for additional safety. That could only go so far, by the way. If you put yourself in a horrible situation, find some isolated area in the middle of a hot spot, and you go in there to sell a car, or you go in even ways to buy a car, so you have money on you, and the seller demands cash, and you said, sure. Unless you're going to roll with a crew like 5 deep, I don't know if you're going to have enough friends, because they're going to rob you at gunpoint. Avoid carrying substantial amounts of cash to your person, case in point. Refrain from handing over items until payment has been verified, received and verified. That's if you're the seller. Because it works both ways. In this case, the young man went to sell something. He could have very easily gone to buy something. The thing with the buyer, when you go to buy something and you go to pay in cash, and this will probably be arranged beforehand, don't mind that technically you could do wire transfers, online banking right now, right? Because if we're serious in life and it's about large amounts of money. But if you're the buyer, it's very obvious they could rob you of your cash. If you're the seller, I'll go back to what I said. If you were looking to sell something, it's already bad enough. We have situations where, I don't know if they take it for granted, who's going to rob the seller? They will rob the seller. They will rob the seller. This is literally an example of that. Unaware, willfully, there was a situation in Holy Name. I don't have a personal opinion on it. I don't have any personal knowledge, or no one has told me anything. Everyone I know that went to Holy Name, obviously, they graduated a long time ago, right? I am not close to anybody, any young girl in my family or friend group, you know, sister, cousin, neighbor, whatever. There's no, I'll say this. It's very interesting that, you know, a sister will have such allegations leveled against her. Now the question is, it seems as though a lot of people had strong opinions or information. And fine, the fact that she was going to be made principal of the school, that was the determining factor, it seems, for them to act. But I would argue that if the accusations to this nun are true, why did we not act sooner? And I'm not saying that to say that it isn't true. I'm saying that to say that it's a shame that it had to reach this point. Because it seemed as though, for the most part, people were burying their heads in the sand, shelving it. I guess, to some extent, it's going to be, I don't know if it's the victims questioning who's going to believe me, or is it worth it, or I don't want to rock the boat. But on some level, and you know what, I've seen this in the service industry. People don't want to complain, people don't want to make noise, you know, we want to keep things internal, you know, even if the situation has us upset. The problem is, if you don't speak out about it, then there's no way for whoever is in charge of the situation to rectify it. And then you're basically setting up the people after you to have to go through whatever it is you went through. Now, if you make a fuss and the school refuses to do anything about it, then I can understand you don't necessarily want to, not everybody wants to take up that fight. But at the same time, Holy Name is fortunate, I think, that this is as bad as it is, and it didn't go further. Because, like I said, I know of another school that was recently in the news. And the stuff in the news, the physical violence to an elected official, that's not the worst things I've heard coming out of that school. Not by a long shot. That's not the worst things I have heard students perpetrate in that school. Not by a long shot. So, to what extent? Because in that situation, in that school, that situation, a similar thing happened. Now, it was so extreme, it's a bit more within the boundaries of what normally happens that people don't want to speak out. Based on what I've been told. But the problem is, regardless of whether it's understandable or not speaking out caused other people to have to go through the same ordeal that the people before them went through. But these are young students now. In our schools. We don't have a society of speaking out. We have a society of keeping our heads down. And when we keep our heads down, it's very easy, because if we're not going to speak out about something, why do we want to know? We don't want to know. Why do we want to know? That's frustrating. We do have the capacity for critical thinking. We do have an intelligent population. Or at least we should. In theory. But all too often, we don't actually apply our intelligence to an important aspect of our life. We don't utilize just our attention, our awareness. So then what happens is, when something bad happens to you, some public administrator, clerk, whatever, mistreats you, was rude to you, whatever, give you the runaround. Look what happened with Tobago with the Registrar General Office. Giving people the runaround. No, you had to go to Trinidad to do that. Government there saying, no, we set you up there to do these things. We send them to have to fly or take a boat to Trinidad to sort out the business for. The thing is, if you kind of just take it, if you just accept it, if you just suffer the consequences on your own, somebody else will be right behind you. and right behind them, and somebody will be right behind them. And it won't end until someone speaks up about it, until someone is willing to take their head out of their phone and look at the car in front of them with the hazard lights on, and not just want to complain about being a victim, but actually put their brain as to, all right, where do I move forward from here that makes sense? Because right now our population, for the most part, not everybody is in this boat, but right now I feel our population is essentially like the people who, on some level, even refuse to acknowledge the signs of watching the cars in front of them drive around. And they just pull up behind and a car with hazard lights on, and they just refuse to utilize their awareness. They refuse to utilize some minor amount of critical thinking to figure out, hey, what do I need to do extra to get around this issue, to overcome this obstacle, as opposed to just sitting on my rear end, beeping my horn, as though that will magically cause this car that hasn't moved to with no driver in it to somehow get up and go. No, we're too concerned about this and this, and not literally about what obstacle is right in front of us. At times, it's a simple fix. How do we solve it? Last night, I saw these videos. I didn't necessarily think I could have edited them down to show them today, but I did find it was interesting because I saw two videos on topics that I think should be examined by people in this country to see how applicable they are. One is, of course, a certain design of single occupancy apartments in new buildings in Chicago, because it's to meet certain criteria of demand for new homeowners or young homeowners, or just people who might not be new or young, but they want a certain lifestyle and they're willing to pay for it. Square footage space is not necessarily one of the more important factors on where they want to live. It's location, it's relative comfort, basics, maybe a sense of community. So there's a new trend of, at least in Chicago, these smaller apartments, right? Which allow, yes, financially for investors, it allows for a relatively good return on investment, at least on some metrics. Doesn't seem to necessarily be an efficient use of space, because essentially you have to do plumbing and certain infrastructure work for individual small units, as opposed to trying to do single family or more, where then, you know, the infrastructure is used, the investment in the infrastructure is kind of like, that cost is spread out amongst more users, so it's kind of justified more because it's more efficiently being used. Now, to what extent should we consider things like that here for our young people here? Because on some level, it's not a bad starter property. I need somewhere to live, rent, right? I'm young, I'm single. It could have a queen size bed. I mean, not everybody is going to have 2 to 3 kids by 22, right? And in fact, on some level, I don't know to what extent the phenomenon of reducing in birth rates or not being able to replace our population, when are we going to reach there? Potentially, the smaller square foot space means on some level, yes, rental value per square feet is not necessarily going to be less. It actually might be more, but the total might be less. So you're not necessarily getting a 2-bedroom apartment, but we might be able to fit more apartments in certain areas where people want to live. Now, what helps that situation is if you have good public transportation, because then you won't cause a whole set of people to be concentrated in a space, and they all want to drive cars. One of the other things I saw, and I think this was Brazil, they went so far as to basically have a raised road, like how you would have a raised train track, train subway line, right? But they did it for buses instead, because I'm a big proponent on a bus service that operates like a train, and you provide it with infrastructure to be uninterrupted like a train, except you use buses, even buses of a certain size, because the buses are cheaper. Putting elevated platforms for a road for these buses is cheaper than doing so for a subway, because rail is heavier. It just is. It's more expensive. So even if we had considerations of not having enough space on our roadways, it is possible. Instead of having a raised train, you could have raised bus routes for buses only, not just any buses, large mass transit buses. The problem with that is that obviously is still going to be capital intensive. But if we had that, then we could potentially have more concentrated areas. And as much as you might think Port of Spain and Diego Martin and, you know, areas in the West, you could apply this philosophy in developments in Central and South and so on. And then now for low-income housing, does it have to be large units? I know already that a lot of it is small units, but potentially it could get smaller. One of the issues I have with social programs is social programs should not be designed to support fully families. Because if a family could live off of social programs, why are the parents going to get jobs? You saw this in America with COVID. If you are giving people an income for COVID, why are they going to come off of that income to go seek jobs? So you had to cut it. These are some of the things I think, honestly, we should be talking about on a regular basis, right? These are some of the things we should be forums and talk shops, you know, and having panel discussions, taped and broadcast on state media, right? And not have some dog and pony show where it's a lot of buzzwords and who wants a photo opportunity and none of that. But rather literally have a situation where stakeholders could come together, let it be, you know, transparent for full public viewing, talk about ideas, talk about intentions, shop things around the public in morning talk shows, have discussions on social media platforms for alternate solutions as opposed to, because right now, this is the reality. We have our heads so far down in the sand. The politicians are just going on autopilot with a lot of these things because we are not willing to engage in these situations in any meaningful way. It is very difficult to change. But at the end of the day, on some level, I think most people who have looked at the situation, even with a cursory glance, will probably at some point consider the fact that we need more innovative solutions because we can't spend our way out of our problems. And in order to implement innovative solutions, you need to have a willing population. Because it don't matter how innovative the solution is, if people don't give it a chance, it ain't going to go anywhere. Look, somebody, not saying who, we all know who, tried to utilize Traggett Road at Arapita Avenue and change the flow of traffic to try to help make the flow of traffic more efficient. It didn't work. On some level, I don't think the public bought in. There's a city in the Netherlands. They made it. They banned anyone from driving through the city center. In order to drive around the city, you literally have to go to the outside of the city and take a road to go around the outside of the city and come back in. And people didn't like it at first. But it achieved the objectives they wanted to achieve. And it did not lead to any detriment to businesses in the city center. But it reduced noise. It reduced traffic flow and traffic congestion in the center of the city. It helped beautify and make the center of the city more welcoming. Of course, you need public transportation. These are the kind of things we should be considering, debating. Do we just leave Port of Spain as is? How can we change it? What do we want to see change in our national transportation system? In our mass transit public system? What are we willing to give up to get it? Because here's the other thing with a mass transit public system. If we need to build infrastructure for it, do you know what that means? Cynically, that means you have an opportunity for corruption to give out contracts and get money under the table. But take cynicism out of it. It means jobs. It means spending government money on jobs for long-term investments, not just to cut grass. And then you'll have to spend that same amount of money in however, a couple of weeks to cut grass again. We're talking about long-term infrastructure development projects while giving people jobs so that we could inject cash into society now for now. That's how you get real good ROI on government spending and get the most out of your government dollars, as opposed to another grant or another work project where it seems as though a lot of the social programs of the government aren't designed to help people get out of a bad economic position, but are designed to make people dependent on the government. As they stay in, they have some incentive to remain in a bad economic position. Why does that matter to the rest of us? The weaker the economy is, the worse off we all are. Part of a weak economy is not being able to develop your people, for the people to develop themselves. Because if more people were in a better economic situation, just basic math, there will be more tax revenue to spend on important things. I'll close this whole long monologue with this, switching gears a little bit. NH is complaining that they have been secretly disbarred from tendering for contracts under the now suspended $3.4 billion housing program. Listen, all I'll say is this. I don't know to what extent Mr. Elias played politics. The problem is when you play politics, politics at times has a way of biting back. And I do find it very, very ironic because he's complaining about this government. Before the election, he was complaining about the previous government, who, as far as I'm aware, they had people who were at least friendly with him when he was complaining in a similar fashion about Mr. Manning before Mr. Manning's administration was undermined to the point of calling a SAP election. So you want to play silly games, you cannot get unfortunate prizes. In the long run, sometimes these things have a way of having unforeseen consequences attached. Maybe. Let's take that break. When we come back, I'll wade in further on a story that, while important, I don't necessarily think it's this important, or rather I'll continue the commentary, then we'll open the phone line. Stay tuned. This is Talking About WSN. We'll be right back after this.
In Trinidad and Tobago, cervical cancer still remains a serious health problem, ranking the third most frequent cancer among women in this country.
So you may be happily at home not knowing you might have the early signs or the early stages of cervical cancer. So the first thing is that it can be completely without any symptoms or signs.
Are you driven, ambitious, and ready to earn? WESN, the content capital, is expanding, and we're looking for dynamic media sales executives to join our team. Sell powerful advertising solutions across television, digital, and social media platforms, and help brands tell their story. If you have strong communication skills, a passion for sales, and the drive to succeed, join WESN today. Send your CV to marketing@wsncc.com or WhatsApp 6861662 and start building your future.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide, Center City Mall, Chaguanas and Movietown, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
In this day of stay-at-home and work from home, home has never meant more than it does today. Whether you're looking to buy, rent, or build your new home, now is the time to get going. Gittins & Gittins real estate agents are here to take you to that place of your dreams. Let us take you home. We help you find that rental to rest along the way or journey with you to find your home destination. Investors and commercial enterprises too, call us and we'll walk the distance to place your business in just the right location. Owners, leave the headaches to us. We'll find your tenants or buyers while you stay at home. We'll even manage your property at your bidding. Anything real estate, come home to Gittins & Gittins Real Estate. Call us at 760-3280 or 747-1220 or visit us at 16 Fifth Street in Woodbrook.
Hi, I am Emiliana Beechan and I am a mental health and conflict resolution consultant. Welcome to Mind Matters, the show where we explore the intricate world of mental health and the art of conflict resolution. Join us as we hear from mental health professionals, conflict resolution experts, and everyday people who have transformed their lives through understanding and communication. Mind Matters, WESN Content Capital.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
One of the things that I feel I should now bring up is the fact that perhaps regardless of my personal opinions, I have to acknowledge, as Karen did in a similar situation, which is connected to this, that sometimes it's not about the individual anymore, at least. This whole situation with the not the Public Accounts Committee, the PAAC, and its inquiry into the pharmaceutical industries has caused now a controversy with regards to the opposition essentially seemingly sitting on the presented resignation of Senator Janelle John Bates. She has already, given a resignation letter or given her intention or a request to resign from the Senate. The opposition leader has not necessarily decided to accept that or not. And then, of course, there's also the role that Senator Faris Hawari had to play in the situation as well. And I'm not necessarily here to debate that. Karen and I have the opinion. She did the work, right? I'm following her lead, but I based on her explanation, I agree with it. That as a senator, potentially interfering with the work of a subcommittee of Parliament, whereas the Senate is part of Parliament, that's not necessarily a good look. Also, potentially not advising his junior to not be involved in something like this where there is a direct conflict of interest. That's also not a good look. It is one of those things where, to what extent do we want people operating in the gray area and not necessarily consider, look, at the end of the day, if we want to do things formally and properly, then as much as it doesn't seem that important, we need to understand that at times it is that important. Now, of course, there's a whole situation where Senator John Bates is technically on a committee. This is the Joint Select Committee of National Security. The committee does not want to meet with her on the committee. I don't necessarily know if it has to go that far, but at the end of the day, on some level, she admitted to doing something that she should not have done. This is different to when a politician gets accused of a crime, because they will deny the crime as opposed to admitting. But of course, what she did on some level was not necessarily on the same level of severity scale with regards to any politician potentially committing a crime or actually committing a crime, right? But one of the things with regards to the whole situation that Karen did acknowledge is the fact that on some level, yes, the Speaker of the House, he does have links to this case. He represented some of the smaller pharmacies. So on some level, she doesn't necessarily have an issue with him and doesn't necessarily distrust him from executing his duties properly. But it does set a precedent that, well, you can be connected to something and still then oversee a body which is supposed to be objective and third party to whatever the situation is. This is on some level, ironically, not anywhere close to the same level of severity as with regards to the situation that the former Attorney General Reginald Lamar found themselves in, where he was on the defense of the Piarco Airport case, I believe, and then now he became the Attorney General, which basically flipped him, right? So just that alone makes his situation a lot more severe, a lot more important than this. But it's along that line loosely, right? One of the things is with regards to human nature, you give an inch, they take a mile. To what extent is the Speaker's previous involvement and then now chairing the committee that's inquiring on that situation? Again, it's supposed to be objective and unbiased so that, for the people's business, not to advance any one agenda or to be undermined by the perception that you're advancing an individual or private agenda. But one of the points that Karen made was that it's not about the Speaker. It's literally about what is the precedent that's going to be set. How do we want things to function? And sometimes individual politicians need to understand, it's not that you are untrustworthy, it's that it is not proper for this thing to happen, and we should not allow it to happen, regardless of who it is, exceptions should not be made. Because once an exception can be made, more exceptions can be made. The door is now open. And then eventually, the rules or the gentleman's agreement or the proper behavior or the proper procedure or just proprietary is gone. Now, in the case of Senator John Bates, who already tendered her resignation or presented her resignation or offered it, it's no longer, I think, about her anymore. Now we have to ask the question, why is this going on for so long? Because regardless of her ability as a senator, as a legislator, as a lawyer, regardless of her ethics, some people would say she lacks it, it doesn't matter anymore. Now we've reached the point where this is taking up too much time. But more importantly, what is the message that is being sent? That it's okay for politics to basically grind Parliament to a halt? The thing is, I don't necessarily have an issue if the opposition thinks that Senator John Bates is being mistreated, that they defend her. The problem is it seems as though they're kind of somewhat silent on the matter. But if you've resigned yourself to accept that fate, then accept it and move on. But we're not seeing that. What we're seeing is a holding pattern, and I have a bit of an issue with it. Because first of all, the holding pattern does Senator John Bates or Senator Awari no justice, to be honest. It doesn't help them look any better. It potentially makes them look worse, right? Maybe not Senator John Bates. It potentially makes the opposition look weak because the Prime Minister has his complaint. And on some level, yes, that's a political opponent. But I'm not going to necessarily, just because the Prime Minister said it, I have to disagree with it on this situation because of whatever reason. No. Just because I have criticism of the Prime Minister somewhere else means I have to disagree with the Prime Minister here. No. It's a reasonable point. Now, I disagree to the extent that the government is making this a situation, but I'll explain that in a bit. It's a reasonable argument to make. Why is the opposition seemingly just sitting down doing nothing over it? Accept the resignation or fight and defend her. But don't just... So now, of course, the reason why it brings up weakness, some people might think, yeah, they're indecisive, they can't make a decision because they're weak-willed. No. I have to question, is there some issue in the party? I don't necessarily want to go too far down that rabbit hole publicly because it's pure speculation, but I'm just asking a question. Is there some issue with the politics? And it might be more than the party. It might actually be the political battle behind the scenes between the UNC and the PNM, not the government and the opposition. What is it that we're missing? Because letting it being drawn out longer and longer, I don't know to what extent it serves anybody any justice. Does anybody any good, right? If you're going to defend somebody, then pursue a defense. But if you have no defense, don't try to defend the indefensible if that's the case. And in this case, it's not whether or not the situation is indefensible. It's more if you have no defense to put forward that you think is going to work, why hold out hope for an impossible situation to just magically turn around? What is it? Now, I do find the situation is being, to some extent, dragged out by the government as well. An interesting thing happened where Opposition Chief Whip Marvin Gonzalez attempted to criticize the government, failing to account to the population, calling it nothing short of a deflection. Well, to be honest, this is one of those things where, yes, I'm not going to say the government set up the opposition and caused this situation. But does anybody think that they're not milking this for all it's worth? And at some point, it's not about what's in the public's interests, but rather, if this is the main story on front page news, you know what's not the main story on front page news? Government policy. Because there's very few times the opposition gets to be scrutinized to the same extent of the government. The UNC opposition was scrutinized to the same extent as the PNM government back before the election. Let's be real. Because at some point, even I had to stop because it was getting frustrating. I was repeating the same thing over and over again. It might have looked as though I had some bias against them, some axe to grind, when the reality was they were doing the same mistake over and over again, in my estimation, by my opinion. Well, it just didn't make any sense talking about it all the time. Similar to the opposition now, they lost the election. Like at some point, blaming them for things and wanting to hold them to account for things they did wrong in the last administration, to some extent, they already suffered the consequence, right? Now, if the public wants to still be mad at them and it makes their attempt to rehabilitate their image harder and longer, so be it. But the government, in certain ways, wanting to say, oh, no, it's the PNM's fault. Like, sometimes it's still pertinent, but is it necessary? They already got their consequence. Now you need to avoid making the same mistakes to avoid suffering the same fate. It can't happen. But the opposition is saying that the government is being blocked from holding Prime Minister to account after 5 of 7 questions submitted to the Prime Minister's question time were disallowed in Parliament. Now, and we have a call. I'll try and be quick. The Leader of Government is saying the opposition, the issue raised by the Chief Whip is nothing short of a deflection of the real issue about their deafening silence. Here's the thing. What's happening in the Senate is important, yes. It's not the only important thing. When COVID happened, heart attacks didn't stop, cancer didn't stop, diabetes didn't stop, babies still had to be born, children still at times got other illnesses, right? Not everything was COVID. Not everything that was health related just got overridden by COVID. Not every issue got overridden by what's going on in the Senate, in the parliamentary committees, and got overridden by what's going on in the Senate, and got overridden by the opposition leader not yet accepting resignation of a senator. Like, the rest of the issues of the country are not less important than this. Some of them are more important. And I do find it rich that the Leader of Government Business and the opposition chief whip are basically saying the same thing. The difference is the Leader of Government Business is trying to somehow dissuade us that the Prime Minister's own behavior is not an issue. And I'll say it is an issue in the sense of more and more people. I said this before the opposition started saying it, as far as I'm aware. She's not present. Where's the leadership? The opposition being in hot water does not give the government license to disappear, to ignore their responsibilities, to not have to be present, to not have to have press conferences, to not have to answer questions to the media. When's the last time the Prime Minister did that? And how often does she do it? Yes, on some level, the opposition is trying to find some way to move the conversation along from this issue. But similar to how this issue the government didn't cause the issue, they're just taking advantage of it. That's a very real concern that Opposition Chief Whip Marvin Gonzalez has. And the fact of the matter is, I do believe that the government is milking this for all it's worth because they themselves have many indefensible positions when it comes to their own policy. Why do I say it's indefensible? They haven't given defense for certain things or explanations for certain things. That's how it starts. The Minister of Finance, former Minister of Finance, having an issue with the Auditor General didn't happen year 1. It happened in what, year 8, year 9? It doesn't start all bad. It starts going a direction. If you want to put your head in the sand and be willfully unaware, it doesn't matter on some level. It matters less whatever direction the opposition is going. They don't set policy. Now is not the time to give the government a free pass and still be critical of the opposition. Now is the time when the opposition is less important in terms of these types of discussions, and the magnifying glass is supposed to be on the government, because they're the ones actually controlling the money, because they're the ones actually making the decisions. And if they don't have enough things to say in order to give us a sense of accountability and transparency, maybe we should take an issue with it, because I did take an issue with it from the previous government for about 4 years. It's only fair that I hold the current government to the same standard. Okay, now I'll take the call. Diego Martin, good morning, you're on here. Sorry for the wait.
Okay, no, apology accepted. Okay, I want to talk about governance, and you raise an issue, I think, with NH and how he was allegedly treated with the OPR regulator. And what has happened there, apparently the OPR has told him, this is what I'm reading in the newspaper, he filed his complaint too late, outside the time. I believe he has a genuine case for the OPR to answer. When we choose people for these independent institutions, it must be honesty, integrity, and competency. This OPR regulator was appointed sometime in 2023 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Her very first year, she was at variance with the requirements. I don't want to say she broke the law, but it's that. Her second year, she apparently doing the same thing. So that basically tells me her competency or her integrity is complicit or compromised. And the president has to act. We have a complicit president. Let us not be about it. Somebody has to act to get back governance. And let me give you the 2 points. One of the key requirements of the OPR regulator, it was late by 8 months.
Mm-hmm.
This year, it is late by 4 months. So every year since she has been appointed, her report to Parliament is late. So that is why I'm saying the NH man has some evidence to question why was he being targeted for late response when the OPR is breaking the law and is at variance to the law. And I'm hoping that the president sees that. We cannot have a OPR who has question marks against her. And we have to look at the background to see where she was. They say she was an acting DPS. She was in the Ministry of Housing, apparently under Camille Ridgely. She might have been in planning. There is one big issue that happened sometime 29 when Kate Christopher Rowley was the then Minister of Housing. Remember the Shanghai 5,000 houses that a contract was given and it was cancelled? Was she anywhere close to that? I'm just asking, because I believe we cannot have people with questionable integrity. She must be like Jawanti Ramdas. Be honest, show integrity, and stand up for what is right. You can't hide under the cloak of appointment by the president because you believe she will not question your judgment and your competency. But as a citizen, I am questioning her ability. I go on and listen to your affair.
Thank you, caller. I don't necessarily have a strong opinion on the current situation. I do think that the procurement regulator, yeah, I mean, I have no reason to disagree with you, right? That is to say, I can't present an active argument that disagrees with you, right? And I do feel as though that office has been undermined, right? But the actual details of which I'm not entirely sure. But it was telling that, they got rid of the guy who was seemingly doing his best. But the thing is, with regards to the issue of procurement, it is my understanding that the whole situation was a mess even from the time of Mr. Manning. And what Mr. Manning did was not necessarily outside the norms. Not saying that it was necessarily correct procedure. What I'm saying is what he did or allegedly did or whatever might not have been outside the norms. And some of those norms might have even had some level of practical necessity. Because the whole situation, when you have too much red tape, and when you do not have ease of doing business, and when you have, slow bureaucracy and a whole host of other things, you find workarounds. And sometimes when the public is presented the workarounds, it looks like corruption. Because it essentially, at times, basically, even if it isn't corruption, it's more or less the same kind of things that someone who actually is corrupt would do. And it's really hard to differentiate what is actual corruption and what is just you trying to work around a system that's not working properly. And here's the thing, this is why you shouldn't be using workarounds. This is not to defend people that use workarounds. No. It's not my fault if you do something that could appear as corruption and then people view it as corruption. What am I supposed to say? Now, again, this is what I've been told. I don't have significant knowledge on the situation, so it could be wrong, right? But the thing is, the situation with regards to government contracts for construction projects was not in a good way. It was not managed properly from Mr. Manning's time and maybe even before. Because remember, there's also the whole airport, Piarco airport situation, etc., etc., etc. So part of it now is you have a situation where it is not being run properly. Because it's not being run properly, people are allowed to be fast and loose at times. Hush, hush, well-kept secret, nobody wants to say nothing. Until now, what happens is when you're not running something properly, all too easy, all kind of nonsense could happen. All kinds of nonsense could happen. And Mr. Manning, on some level, whether he was guilty of anything or not guilty of anything, he paid the price for that. He might have been innocent for the most part, but he still paid a price for how the construction industry was allowed to operate and how government contracts were being awarded and how those projects were being managed. Whatever he did or didn't do, he paid a price for it. Now I think Mr. Elias is, to some extent, having to bear consequences of operating in an unhealthy system, which he himself didn't necessarily try to clean up. Now, he did have his complaints at times, and I get it too. It doesn't matter how big you are not immune to a government ostracizing you. Right? That's essentially what he's saying now. Now, where the truth is on the details, it might be hard to know. But I guess the hope would have been that the OPR should be a force of improving things and changing things for the better. Is it? At this point, it's hard for me to say that it is. It's very hard for me to say that it is. The procurement regulator, at least to me, the one thing that I notice that I don't like seems quite passive. Quite passive. And I don't know if a passive person is good enough for the demands of that office in the circumstances of the situation that it's in now. It's not a healthy situation, so you could just be passive and ensure that nobody rocks the boat with some wildness. No, the situation is wild, and it needs someone to actively help sort it out. And if the procurement regulator is too passive, I don't know then if she has the capacity to do so. Part of it, however, could be because of, the office, is it resourced? What was the legislation completed? Was it undermined too much? Because the previous administration basically only passed things on simple majority. The government was happy to allow that to happen. Only now they're kind of realizing, hey, but the Senate But just wait. I think the government is essentially just waiting for the president's term to be up, then they'll appoint their own president, and that president will appoint independent senators, and those independent senators will probably be more willing to work with the government. And by willing, I won't be surprised if everything that the current crop of independent senators have been accused of, the new independent senators that will undoubtedly come down the pipe will be accused of just as bad. And that's how they'll get legislation through that requires 3/5 majority or what have you. So the whole situation is in a mess. And that goes into how we run our country just in general, the public sector, contracts, construction, right? And it's not to say that construction is squeaky clean in other parts of the world. No, it's a very complex, large scale in terms of money, resources, and just physical scale. It's a very complex thing. It's not easy to run perfectly. Get that, understand that. But on some level, again, people were blissfully unaware. Or, in the case of contractors and the like, they were blissfully unaware because who wanted to get contract and didn't want to rock the boat? And that's not even the worst. Then there's the ones that were outright corruption, right? And what happened? When do we hear complaints? Well, I'll tell you who doesn't complain, the people that gets the contracts. The people that complain are the ones that don't get the contracts. And sometimes that's the same people. NH complains when it doesn't get contracts, and it's happy and says nothing when it has contracts. And that's, I'm not saying that their complaints aren't valid. It's just, it makes you wonder, right? Who else operates like that when they're happy to ignore any of the problem signs as long as the contracts come their way? And it goes back to what I said earlier. Are we going to be willfully ignorant and have our heads in the sand? Because as long as we're being paid, we don't care how bad the situation is. No one thinks it's going to happen to them until it happens to them. Let's say the comment, yeah. Morning, Sean. Former Prime Minister Basil Pandey, in his assessment, made the statement, politics had a morality of its own. How ironic that the PNM seems to procrastinate on the Arima mayor, Senator Bates, and Faraz Sawari, among other political operatives and other matters. I highly respect former Speaker Barry Sinaran and his insightful comments about the PNM and Senator Bates and the Parliament. Indeed, politics has a morality of its own. We ain't going nowhere fast. Listen, the thing is, I think the situation is more complex behind the scenes, but I can't really speak to that or speculate on that because I don't want anyone to think that Senator John Bates told me anything and whatever. Now, I could be wrong, but ironically, one, if I think I'm wrong, then I probably shouldn't say it, right? Because it would be inaccurate. If I'm right, it might cause issues because I'm just speculating, it's a guess, there's always a chance that it's right, and then, of course, people don't like coincidences, so they're going to say it's a conspiracy. The problem is, I don't really see the government as being upholding the moral high ground for the most part. Right? Now, maybe in the case of the senators, on some level, yes, it's not as though the government has done anything egregious in this situation, right? At least there's a certain amount of bad faith politics, but it's not central or core to the situation. But there are other areas, other issues where I do find government trying to claim a moral high ground is kind of ridiculous. Because it's not as though they've done anything so bad that we need to shun them. It's that the manner of which they go about doing so. They don't show us a moral high ground. They don't show us the government being better than the previous administration. They just say it. And some people choose to believe it. And I have an issue if you are going to say you're something, but you're not actually practicing what you say you are. We have Sanfan on the line, caller. Good morning.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
I like your discussion this morning. Let me first go at this issue with Paris Awari and Mrs. Bates. I still maintain that Mr. Awari had a right to consult with Mr. Dial Singh as his attorney. Miss Bates or Miss John Bates, I'm very respectful. However, in the position that she was in on the committee, yes, made an unethical choice, and for that, she should resign from the committee. I dare say she put herself in a position where now she can be challenged as being a senator, because this is going to follow her around for the rest of her political career. However, I also want to comment on what you talked about with the Speaker Jagdev Singh as the chair of the committee.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much of those committee hearings that you have looked at, but it was clear from the beginning that Mr. Singh had an axe to grind with against the authorities that oversee the issuance of pharmacy license and the like. It is clear.
Mm-hmm.
I have looked at all of them. So, to what extent he should have recused himself, I think there's a strong case for him not being the chair of the committee, and actually he should have recused himself. That being said, Sean, why do people join? Why do people become politicians? Why do you go up to be a councillor, to be an MP? This has nothing to do with for the most part. Some people may want to really serve the country or serve the district, but this is about money, Sean.
Mm-hmm.
This is about being in a position of influence, being able to influence things, and being able to go upwardly mobile financially. And it is clear in our politics, this is what it is about. This is what it is about. Mr. Pandey tried to put it nice, politics has a morality of its own. It's not a morality of its own, it's about corruption and nepotism and jobs for the boys and girls. I remember, Sean, some years ago, I did business in the Caribbean island. And one day I sat down with the Prime Minister of that island, and we were having a conversation. He was actually reading a book. I saw this book he had. It's called Governance of Small Island States. So I said to him, I said, you wrote that book? And just in jest. And he laughed. He said, no. I said, what is the hardest thing as a politician? That man said to me, letting go of power. He said, once you taste it, you never want to let it go. And this is what is happening in Trinidad and Tobago. This infectious need to control the country, control the purse, and do what you will when you're in power. And to hell with who else wants to say anything. Once we in power, we can do what we want. And this has spanned across administrations since independence. This is a rotten country, Sean. And so it behooves me sometimes. How do we fix this? Because it's only the people could fix this, you know. It's only the people could fix this. I really do have an answer.
Mm-hmm.
But nice discussion, Sean. Nice discussion today. Have a good day. And morning to Mr. Dabadi. Bye, Sean.
Thank you, caller. I'll respond after. We do have another call that's been waiting. Arima, I believe, on the line. Caller, good morning. You're on the air. Caller, good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
Morning, Sean. Nice program as always. I always enjoyed it. But I have an issue with the opposition leader. Why is it they don't put things in place and stop playing games? If the senator is wrong, she did something wrong. Get on with it. It is wrong, wrong is wrong, and right is right. Come on, opposition leader, you're sticking all the time. The country had to move on. People want to know what's really going on with you. Come on. It's time to stop playing games. Move on. Business time now. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. I mean, yeah, it's one of the sentiments that I express at the end of the day. That's going to be the question, right? If you had a defense, fine. Mount the defense. Give it. Fight it. But the opposition seemingly has no defense to fight, or at least for whatever reason they're unwilling to do so right now. So then what is the public left to think? That's the unfortunate catch-22, because I think, I will speculate a little bit, because I do think that the opposition leader is caught between a rock and a hard place, right? Because the key is, Mr. San Fernando, I'll say this, to respond to Mr. San Fernando, because it's pertinent to what the caller just said and my response to what the caller just said, or my continuation. If Senator John Bates, who was a member of the committee, was not involved, then they would not have enough rope to go after Faris Alwari, Senator Alwari, in this situation, right? Because on some level, Mr. San Fernando, you are right. To get to him, they have to go through her. However, we have Claxton on the line. Caller, good morning. You're on the air.
Yeah, hi.
Morning.
Yeah, hi. Morning, Sean. Hey, you know, if you really, it's funny how some people could see who is right and who is wrong. It come like, on whose side it is, yeah, boy, it's wrong. But on the other side, when it's wrong, it's like it's right. What kind of logic and what kind of sense is that? If you carefully look at the government today and see how much people is so wrong, we're not supposed to be there. And nobody here calling them out. Not even you, Sean, calling them out. You understand? They're not supposed to be there. Wrong is wrong. Right is right. How come you could suspend the police officer? I and all was working in a government job and was suspended for 2 weeks with no pay. How it is these people is able to sit down in front of our population, right? And you have things in your closet. The population know they, and you sit comfortably and you want to give laws to the good citizens out here. How correct that is? How that can be right? And then you have people now calling him and saying, well, yeah, this is wrong, and she should move, and she should this. But the whole bunch at the other side, where is wrong, nah, we have seen nothing wrong in that. So we play watching. You know why watching? It's either we spiritually blind, you understand? We waiting till everything just collapse. You understand? But the point is that we have a leader, the Prime Minister, and you is saying that these people who is parliamentary people, you understand, ministers, she is not responsible for them. She is responsible, Sean. She is. Because I sure it have good citizens out there that these people, she could remove anybody there and get good citizens to help run this country the right way. But you can't, the population is watching out here, Sean, and they are seeing down to the little children. They are seeing that these people is in parliament doing so much of corrupted things. And then you sit there and you want to give laws out here. That can't be right, Sean. Come on. You as a talk show host, you should help this country by calling them out. Just like what we did when Dr. Keith Rowley was there. If he pee, everybody call him out. Everybody say he was this. Everybody say he was that. That's the kind of people we have. But the other side now, they're doing the same corrupted thing, and we just sat them there and we watching them. That can't be right, Sean. Let me get it right now. If we want this country to go good before it collapse, let me get it right. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Sorry, we have another caller? Oh, sorry. I heard something else in the background that wasn't the caller's voice. So, but look, I have called out the Prime Minister, right? I have called out the Prime Minister and the government for, like I said, they're taking this issue. And essentially, leader of government business want to say that the opposition chief whip is trying to deflect. Well, this whole exercise is one big deflection, to be honest. In my opinion, it is, right? At least it started off that way. And on some level, it still is, but there's another layer to it. But I did call out the government on that, and the fact, repeatedly, the Prime Minister's leadership is not present, right? Now, I'll try and start from the bottom and work my way back to the top. Political parties, they don't want people who only run things the right way. They don't want good people with strong moral values, right? Because at least people who are outward with it. Because there are people with strong character and moral values who probably join politics, and over time, whether it is to try to work within the system or just negative influences, they kind of start to fall into the mean over time. It's difficult to swim upstream. But if you get someone who is blatantly incorruptible, political parties don't want that. They don't want that level of inflexibility. They can't afford it. Why? Because politics has a morality all of its own. It's not just about the corruption. But then now it's the working with people, because at times there might be businessmen who you think are corrupt. But unless you have evidence that they committed a crime, you can't remove them. You can't remove them from the economy. You can't just blank them without some kind of consequences, right? It's not easy. That's the problem. It's not easy to be incorruptible in politics. And even if I were to say go into politics, it's not going to be easy for me to be incorruptible, because at the very least, it's not even about how I would enrich myself. It will literally, at the minimum, come down to who am I going to work with, and if they look bad, regardless of, I could be squeaky clean, I will be guilty by association. That's point number one. Point number two, I will probably have to actively shake hands with people who have controversies hanging over their heads. I will be opting into relationships with businessmen or politicians or what have you. We're a small country, right? Because for a perfect incorruptible political system, everybody needs to be incorruptible. The more people have skeletons in the closet, the harder it is for one person to come into the system and start to just clean things up wholesale. Because it's not just the politicians, it's all of the things around them as well. So there is that. And the thing is, politicians that have cases over their heads, controversies over their heads, they're confident to speak because they know that their peers and their political opponents have similar issues. In the case of the former Minister of Finance, Colm Imbert, I'm pretty certain he doesn't care so much about how people perceive him with regards to the Auditor General situation, because he knows that this is not the first time you've had a politician with a controversy on their head, and many of his peers throughout the years and many of his political opponents throughout the years has had similar situations, and they survive politically. So who is he? That comes back to my complaint with regards to the population not being engaged with politics enough. You want to know how politicians have these issues, potentially committed crimes, potentially committed corruption, allegedly did this, allegedly did that, and still are allowed to confidently serve? It's because the population tolerates it. Innocent until proven guilty, yes, for criminal charges. Popularity and a sense of trust and confidence doesn't have the same burden of proof. But we already set the precedent that we will tolerate nonsense. So how could we then now all of a sudden just flip that switch, flip the script and be intolerant? Now, here's an analogy that actually frightened me, and I don't necessarily think this is true, but on some level, to what degree the correlation is correct, then it will, scale the level of my terror. When you look at things like, if you ever listen to stories in America about homeowner associations, or local example, gated communities. In communities like that, every community like that has a busybody that wants to feel important, who feels entitled to their opinions being heard over the rest of the community's opinions, who feels they know better, who feels that they're always right, who thinks they have some kind of superiority, moral superiority, right, to lord over whatever little power they have because they go up to be on the board to manage the community, to manage the gated community. So they're in charge, and they love to be in charge. It doesn't matter if they're right. What matters is if their opinion is the one that's selected. Here's the thing about that. Because a lot of the best people in those gated community situations are very busy professionals who don't want to take the time to manage the communal property. They rather let somebody else do it. The problem is, at least half the time, you have power-hungry idiots doing it. So then they'll probably want to complain about the mismanagement, but it's like, hey, similar to the population when it comes to our democracy, you want to ignore something and then complain about how it's being run and not actively participate in making the situation better. That seems like wanting to have your cake and eat it too. I'm sorry. But here's the other thing about it. Here's the other parallel. Well, I don't know if it's a parallel. Like I said, to the extent that this correlation is accurate, that will scale up or down my terror. Some of these power-hungry Yahoo idiots are literally that. They ain't the sharpest tool in the shed. Half the reason why their ideas are bad is because their ideas are dumb. It's because they have a specific need and they have a dumb idea that thinks that it's going to solve their problem, not understanding why it's going to be bad for the collective and why that is bad, and it means it should not be implemented, right? But more importantly, when you interact with them at times, they don't necessarily seem like the best and brightest. They're the willing. They're willing in part because they have nothing else going on in their life in some cases. They have nothing else going on in their life, so this is the one area where they could feel important. Now, to what degree do we have that in our politics? Some politicians are successful lawyers, are successful in whatever field they studied, some, and thus they don't need necessarily for professional accolades or for their financial gain to be politicians, right? Those are the ones that probably are extremely ambitious, narcissistic, and just love power, but they're brilliant. But some politicians, you have to ask, what would this person be doing if they weren't in politics? And to what extent is the merit that is seen with these individuals, it's not about their ability to do things, to critically think, to come up with innovative solutions, to work hard. No, it's about rewarding political loyalty. Because they know who signs the checks. They know who butters the bread. They know who's responsible for their gravy train. Politics has a morality all of its own. So, some of these politicians, I would argue, they ain't that bright. They wouldn't be that successful. And they wouldn't really have much going for them if they weren't in politics. But you don't need to fool everybody. You just need to fool people who are desperate to believe in something. the population, there are people who are willingly turning a blind eye to the government because we don't understand. We're not as unemotionally objective as we would like to make ourselves out to be. Everybody makes decisions in part through an emotional thought process. Everybody. Everybody. There might be one exception, some semi-autistic, high-functioning autistic person or some high-functioning psychopath, that's not always a derogatory term, right? Who doesn't understand or experience human emotions like the rest of us. But for the most part, everyone who more or less is within the general range of normal, emotions are part of it. And that makes it really, really hard to be objective and, when necessary, to change your mind. Or in the case of politics, I disagree with one side, therefore I must agree with the other side, and therefore the other side could do no wrong because emotionally I am too invested. I am too invested and I cannot separate reality from what I need to believe in, because I can't believe that this thing is hopeless, because I don't know how to fix it if both parties are bad. So one party has to be good, because I do not want to actively participate in politics. I want to put my head in the sand. I want to avoid everything. I don't want to be responsible. I don't want to have to make decisions. I don't want to have to speak out. And the sad part is, the best leaders are probably the ones most reluctant to take power and the ones who can't wait to give it up. Because they understand the weight of the responsibility that they have been burdened with. And it's a burden. They understand the point. They get it. The problem is, those are the ones best suited for the job, and those are the ones least likely to make themselves available for the job. If Senator John, I'll try and be quick because I'm over time. If Senator John Bates was not involved, they would not have the ability to go after Faris Awari, Senator Awari, right? They need to go through her to get to him, and he seems to be the bigger target. He also seems to be the person the opposition was defending more. And the problem is now they're kind of stuck, because if they accept Senator John Bates' resignation, it potentially adds more ammunition to go after Senator Awari. This is pure speculation here, so I could be 100% wrong. But also, the opposition, the government at times is also potentially trying to use this to undermine the opposition leader, which ironically might be a mistake. Because if you just believe the narrative that the opposition leader is weak, if you said to something the opposition leader is weak and want the opposition leader to be replaced, there's nothing detrimental to that with regards to what I'm about to say. I'm speaking mainly with regard to the government and the government's perspective. If you honestly believe that Penelope Beckles was a weak opposition leader, weak, incompetent, indecisive, whatever, why would you push so hard to have her be replaced? Now, I'm not saying that they are trying to push her to be replaced, but they are attacking her over this issue, calling her weak. They need to be careful now, because as next thing you know, the PNM, the opposition leader decides to step down, somebody else steps in, and all of the work that they did to try to undermine the opposition by undermining Penelope Beckles as the opposition leader then goes away. And there might be somebody else, depending on who they pick, who has other skeletons in his closet, but they might not necessarily be weak. They might end up becoming stronger. If they pick a good leader to follow up, do they have a good leader? That's a whole other question. Somebody suited to be more suited than Penelope Beckles to improve the situation? I don't know about that. I mean, maybe the government has done the math and figured, it's fine. It doesn't matter who they pick. It's a house of cards right now. But hey, I think the government is trying too hard. And that's why I think the government also is trying to deflect. Because they have a mid-year budget review coming up. The more P&M things they have on this mid-year budget review, the more I know they don't know what they're doing and they don't have any answers, because the mid-year budget review is supposed to review a budget that has nothing to do with the former administration. And in the former administration, I took issue when the Minister of Finance kept bringing up COVID every year. Same thing. I don't want to hear a rehash of all the things that you said disadvantaged you. I want to hear what you're going to do about it. And if you can't deliver that in the mid-year budget review, that to me is a sign you don't know what you're doing and you don't know how to get us out of the mess that we're in. That means you're not part of the solution. You are potentially part of the problem. Opposition is part of government. Just saying. All right, thanks to the callers. Thanks. Wait, we have one more comment. Let's take it quick. It shouldn't take long. Integrity welcomes scrutiny. Forensic audits are loathed when the topic of accountability is raised. Non-disclosure agreements are a popular counteraction for public scrutiny. I'll say this. NDAs in the oil and gas sector seems to be the norm. Outside of that, though, yeah, I think you have a point. We are too silent on things. We are not transparent on things. We are not accountable on things. One of my issues is, you are better than the P&M, prove it. Be more transparent. I dare you. I double dare you. In fact, in some ways, not all, they are less transparent. So it's not hard, you know. If you want to be better at politics, for an individual, it's hard. For an organization, it's not. So what that tells me is, as an entity, as an organization, as a political party, perhaps the consensus is not to be better. Thanks to the commenters, thanks to the callers. This is document at WSN. Karen can join me today. She is traveling. We'll see if we can get her next week, but, you know, it gave me an opportunity to rant about an observed behavioral trend that was very disappointing yesterday. Folks, we're over time, so stay safe. Remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. Don't forget it's nice to be nice. Appreciate all of the perspectives this morning, of course. Make it a good day. We'll see each other tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN